Hey, everybody. So, we don't know who assassinated Charlie Kirk or why. He may have been hit by his own people who are plotting to accelerate conflict in a kind of Reichstag echo. He might have been hit by a leftist engaging in righteous adventurism against a hate speech propagandist. He might have been hit by somebody with purely personal motives or challenges. And more than that, the chances that we're going to get a clear story on what happened are doubtful because the current head of the FBI is a QAnon celebrity. So part of living in fascism is knowing that violence is standard. And another part of it is knowing that our access to good information is often broken. And that's why, yes, it's the day after, but this is not a hot take. I'm not a hot take kind of person. But I do think it's worth concentrating on what we can know. We do know that what is gushing out all over the feeds are intense feelings about political violence in general. And I think these are important and confusing and, above all, rushed feelings for everybody, but especially for young people to be able to navigate without being lied to about history or political change. Lies like violence has no place in politics at a time in which fascism is exposing the violent essence of a lot of politics. So I've got this book coming out about anti-fascism and parenting and intergenerational learning, in which I tackle a lot of these issues and I try to take as slow and as sober and as Socratic an approach as I can to the reality of political violence, the spectrum across which it plays out, and where it comes from. Because my kids, and I think a lot of other young people, are aware, at times they're instantly aware, of incidences of political violence and of geopolitical, imperial, and colonial violence, and even genocide. It's a part of their world. And even if the speed of our media doesn't really allow this question to be fully formed and felt, I believe that they are watching and wondering, what should I do in this world to resist or combat or preempt violence? And I believe that they, like everyone else, need more than hot takes and platitudes. And they need more than meta conflicts about how one is meant to feel and respond online when someone like Kirk is murdered. Because that's a discourse that takes on its own energy amongst people who maybe they feel helpless beyond the ability to post. I think this is a crucial point when we think about young people, especially, because telling them in some sort of top down manner how to feel about triggering things can be even more overbearing than telling them what to think. Now, because the focus of my book is on anti fascism, and the reality is that the majority of political violence in the US and throughout the world over the past several decades has come from right wing extremism, aided and abetted by people like Charlie Kirk, the emphasis is on community defense and how to protect those who fascists come for first. So, immigrants, racialized people, trans people, and now anti-genocide protesters. And because the theme is anti-fascism, the understanding is that fascist violence is a predictable outcome of the inherent violence of capitalist systems in which the state is designed to enforce hierarchies of private wealth. And another understanding is that when someone like Charlie Kirk spends years dog whistling and agitating for political violence, the time for debate is over. It's past. And that means that, contrary to what Ezra Klein published this morning in the New York Times in one of the most truly twisted op-eds I've ever seen, it's titled Charlie Kirk Was Doing Politics the Right Way. Charlie Kirk never debated anyone. He wasn't doing politics. He was doing the thing that comes after politics. He was doing a reversion to schoolyard level bullying as he propagandized and glorified pure power. So I have a chapter called Community Defense, in which I tackle these larger issues. And I start with the simple study of what it meant to watch Richard Spencer get punched in the face by a Black Bloc activist back in 2017. I'm sure you remember that. Was that an effective response to a guy who built his career on inciting street violence against minorities? On one hand, he disappeared from public life not long after that. But on the other hand, there are legions lined up behind him, ready to take his place, and violence has probably risen since then. Is that attributable to the punch? Impossible to say. Many factors involved. And did all the memes build solidarity amongst anti-fascists? Probably yes, but it was also easy for the spectacle of it all to overshadow the fact that resisting people like Spencer and inoculating your community against mobs like his takes many different kinds of action. I took a similar pathway on the assassination of Brian Thompson, probably by Luigi Mangione. It was a stark retribution killing that allowed some people to imagine for a while that the wealthy might be someday held accountable for social murder. And that, I think, had some value socially. But again, the individualism of the act, performed for us all like a scene from a true crime drama, has limited material impact. Now, because these two events were so intimate, so easy for some folks to identify with and even fetishize, I also say in the book that everyone who thinks about committing preemptive violence against a street fascist or a social murderer has to bear the moral responsibility of that act. You can't ignore that punching somebody like Richard Spencer could render him paralyzed for life, or that Brian Thompson's kids do not deserve to lose someone who might well have been a decent dad. That will be on your soul. So whoever killed Charlie Kirk bears the same moral burden, whether they're an organic political actor or a professional hitman. They've made their deal. They'll have to live and die with it. And that's the interpersonal framework of consideration. But alongside that, there's also a structural framework that anti-fascists have to pay attention to, and that's attention to the greater good. Now, I recently published some episodes about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German theologian who learned all about anti-fascism after quite a stuffy upbringing from going to a Black Baptist church in Manhattan in 1930. And he brought that fire back with him to lead one of the earliest German resistance movements against Hitler. It came through an organization called the Confessing Church. And he took resistance seriously enough that he was eventually executed for plotting to assassinate Hitler. And when he was asked how he squared his otherwise pacifist ethics against a murder plot, he offered the thought that no one could ever emerge from this situation morally innocent, and that both the no and the yes involve guilt. And then as a Christian, he was able to do this trick where he could throw in the consolation that guilt is always borne by Christ. Now, whether that resonates for you or not, I think that what's of real value here is the sober reflection that no one comes out of fascism clean. That's important to remember when we hear people selectively decrying political violence, days after appeasing Trump on immigration, or days after voting to send more military gear to the IDF. People who say violence has no place in our politics are often refusing to look in the mirror. Or they are doing something that's actually really human and understandable. They're confusing personal morality with political reality and the problem of strategy. And I think that confusion for a lot of people is rooted deeply in childhood because these things are hard to parse apart. But I think that if this had been more clear to me when I was growing up, I wouldn't have spent so much time confused by liberal hand-wringing over the supposed spiritual superiority of nonviolence. I wouldn't have been so easily taken in by whitewashed stories about civil rights or the independence of India being led by perfectly holy men who never lifted a finger against the state. I would have understood that from the point of view of taking action in the world against oppression and fascism, I have two distinct levels of consideration, and sometimes I have to make a deal between the two of them. The first is, what am I personally willing to bear in terms of responsibility? And secondly, will it be worth it in terms of strategy? And so here's where I can end with something else that I think we can be sure of about the murder of Charlie Kirk, regardless of who did it. One killing will not house the unhoused or feed the hungry or frighten away the fascists. It will embolden them. That's part of why Marxists and anarchists abandoned the so-called propaganda of the deed more than a century ago. Decapitating a movement might make sense as part of a larger strategy of social support and solidarity and mutual aid and street medicine, but we're not seeing that here, nor with Luigi Mangione. Most people, including me, have not done that work, to be perfectly frank. And we also know that the fascist blowback to individualist acts will be dangerous forms of collective punishment. Now, one of the main conclusions I come to in this chapter is that you can get clear on your personal morality, and you actually have to, but strategy is something that emerges in community and in conversation with a long history of anti-fascist action that doesn't generally support lone wolves or white knights. Because the fact is, you never have to be alone with the decision of how best to protect your community from fascism. You've always got friends and allies to reach out to. You never have to do it alone. Okay, I hope that's helpful, and I hope that it's a break from hot take energy. Talk to you soon.